let's talk about how we create these expectations, because
Right.
this is a hard thing for a lot of leaders to do. Some of them don't do it well.
Right.
And some of them view it as a punishment. So we want to do this the right way where the team feels seen and heard.
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of times people feel like expectations really aren't expectations. Like if you're walking into a conversation to set expectations with people, a lot of times it feels like correction, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why people avoid it.
I expected you to do this and you didn't. You failed.
Right.
And now I feel like I'm being punished.
See, what you described right there is not an expectations conversation. That is an uncomfortable conversation. And as leaders, a lot of times we get those two wires crossed in our minds. And so what we are confusing expectation for conflict. And, you don't want to do that, because if you get those two wires crossed in your head, you're not actually going to be in the practice of setting expectations. So like when you set an expectation, when you set a healthy expectation, it really should feel empowering to the other person. Like setting an expectation with someone is communicating to them that they're capable, that we see their skills, that they've got great judgment when it comes to the particular, expectation that we're setting. It should feel like an empowering conversation with people. It should be a vote of confidence, right? And if it doesn't feel empowering, you're probably not in the middle of setting expectations. If you're feeling like you're having to be corrective, the reality is that you're probably actually having an uncomfortable conversation. So you gotta pull those two things apart in your brain, or else you're never really gonna get comfortable setting expectations with people.
So guide us through a way to create the right kinds of expectations that will actually stick.
Right. Yeah. So it's like I said before, it's not about like just sitting down with somebody and barking at them. Right. You got to be collected. You have to, have thought things out before you set an expectation. So there's really 4 things that I try to do. I try to, I say frame, empower, measure, and commit, right? So let's do like a sentence on each one of those, right? If you're setting an expectation, you got to really frame up what it actually is. Make it really, really clear for the person to understand, right? You want to do it on like an 8th grade reading level, right? The next thing you really got to do is you got to make sure that you empower the person. They need to understand how they're empowered to go carry out the expectation. And you also need to kind of increase the radius of that a little bit. Not only do you want to empower the person that has the expectation, you want to communicate with like the broader team that person has been empowered to do the expectation, or else they might not get the cooperation and the collaboration that they want from the rest of their team, right? Third thing you got to do is you got to make it really clear how you measure the expectation. Like what does winning, what's the scoreboard? What does winning actually look like? And then the last one is commitment. And man, if I see just one thing get skipped more often by leaders than any one thing, it's, again, an expectation, is a two-way commitment, which means that in order for it to be a two-way commitment, it's more than you just saying it. The other person needs to commit to it. So you need, after you talk about it, you discuss it, you give it all the context, you have to have that paused moment where you say to the person, does this make sense? Can you repeat it back to me? Can you teach it back to me? And are you willing to commit to actually make this happen? Unless you go through all 4 of those things, you maybe even if you're not barking at the person, you're just sort of, you're just sort of talking at them, right? And expectation setting can't be talking at people. It's got to be actually a two-way commitment.
Yeah, just the other day, our personalities team met with Teresa, who leads a lot of our desired future, strat-op kind of meetings.
Right.
And so she was talking about alignment versus buy-in.
Yeah.
So she's like, first we're going to get aligned, but then I need buy-in. I need you all to commit that we are all aligned and we're going to be doing this.
Yeah.
And it felt like I was in the exit row of a flight, and it was the stewardess coming by and saying, are you saying you were ready in case of emergency? And you have to have a verbal yes. And it reminded me of that level of commitment.
Yeah, and this actually came up here just the other day with a team. Yeah, alignment and commitment are not the same thing. You can be directionally aligned, but all that really means is you're just having similar feelings that we're headed in the right direction. We want to move beyond feelings, and we want to get to a high integrity commitment. So you got to treat those as 2 separate things.
Yeah. So we've got frame, empower, measure, commit.
Right.
By the end of that, we're very clear. The team member knows what's going on.
Right.
The entire team knows what's going on.
Right.
And we're all heading in the same direction.
Right. Yeah. So we have an expectation, right? But like you have to move beyond the expectation. You got to move to accountability, right? And so how do you so let's say you have a set of expectations that you've curated with a team member over a period of time. When it actually comes to accountability, creating accountability that lasts, there are 4 things you've got to do on that front. And I'll warn everybody, this is pretty unusual. Like this is something that I've adapted with time in my leadership style, and I've never really seen anybody else do it and until the point in which I started introducing it with my team here, and it's really been a huge help. The first thing that you've got to do when you want to hold people accountable is you've got to visualize their list of expectations. Literally on a whiteboard, stand up with them and say, I need you to get all of the expectations out of your brain, and we're going to visualize them in a single list. And this is something that we're going to use to come back to on a regular basis. If you just rely on your memory and their memory, the likelihood that things like slide off the table and things are forgotten is really, really low. And when that happens, it kind of devalues the accountability culture that you're trying to create. So it's really important to actually visualize all this stuff. Once you visualize it, you got to talk about everything on that list to make sure that everybody understands. You know, they understand, you understand exactly what each one of those expectations are. You got to do a great job as a leader at like pruning that list. Oftentimes as leaders, the only thing that we ever do is just add things to the list. If you want to be a responsible leader, you got to take things away too. You got to look at the trade-offs of what's most valuable and make sure that you're taking stuff away that needs to be taken away. And then the last thing is you need to prioritize. And prioritization is, I think, one of the things that busy leaders have the hardest time with, because one of the things that I'll hear busy leaders say is, well, it's all important. It just all needs to get done. That's kind of crap, if I'm being really honest. That kind of behavior makes me really, really mad, because how can you expect one of your team members to be able to appropriately prioritize what it is they're supposed to do if you as their leader don't have an idea, right? And it's a really unfair setup to do with your team members, right? So you've got to help them look at that list and actually prioritize it.
Yeah, so a lot of this is not on the team member. It's the leader looking in the mirror saying, I have not done a great job of setting expectations and holding my team accountable.
Right.
And so this is a great exercise to do that. On the accountability side, we've got visualize, understand, prune, and prioritize.
Right.
Now, understand, this is a pet peeve of mine, and you can tell me how you feel about it, but usually leaders will say something like, does that make sense?
Right.
And it feels condescending. I know the spirit of it is not.
Yeah.
Is there a better sentence leaders can use that can clarify if the team member is actually picking up what you're putting down?
Yeah. Well, I think probably what makes that a little offensive is if they've not gone into any level of detail and they ask you, does that make sense? You know, the person sitting on the other side is, well, of course it doesn't make any stinking sense. You didn't explain yourself, right?
Usually it's a poor explanation. It's not the team member's fault. It's the leader didn't do a great job, and so they're kind of almost in a defense mechanism going, does that make sense? I'm not sure everything I just said.
I had a leader I worked for years ago at a software company, and his idea of casting vision, he just kept on saying all the time, we're going to the moon, because he thought that would be really
inspiring.
And that's what came to mind when
was your leader Elon Musk by chance?
No, he was not. He definitely was not Elon Musk. We'll just leave it at that. But like you got to give your team some detail, because if you don't, asking them if they understand obviously isn't going to work. But I don't know. I think it is important to ask someone how well they're connecting with what you've just said, and asking somebody, does that make sense? It can sound a little condescending. I think probably the better thing to do would be to say, I want to make sure that you're clear on this so you can be successful. Is there anything I've left out?
Oh, that's good.
So I think a better version of that is, what have I left out? What clarity can I create to help you be successful?